Capture the passion.
Welcome back to CPTP Season 4, Episode 7. Today, we have a very special guest, Mr. Sergio Manzo, and he's going to share with us his journey from being an East LA college student all the way to now being a social worker for DCFS. Sergio, tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. And once again, before I begin, first, I want to take this time to thank you, Jorge, for this opportunity. Definitely honored to be here today and share my path or my journey throughout this time. So, a little bit about how I got into social work. I first went into community college, and this was at ELAC. Started off with wanting to pursue a career in law enforcement, criminal justice. So, decided to get my AA, which was my administration of justice. And then throughout that process, I ended up transferring to Cal State LA, where I ended up getting my bachelor's of science in criminal justice. And throughout my time there, I met two people that to this day I still speak to. One is yourself, Jorge, through a child development course. And through that course, I really learned a lot, not only about child development in itself, but just about my own journey of who I am at that moment and who I was as I am now today. Throughout that time, I also had the opportunity to have a class with Professor Jose Juarez, and he taught a course in juvenile justice. I always went in with this perception, as I grew up in the housing projects of East LA, of let's put bad kids away. It's time for us to actually move from, these behaviors that these kids were doing and actually try to solve the problem, right? And I think for myself, taking that class, I came to realize a lot about reform and a lot about preventative care, a lot about, reducing the stigma of mental health and actually seeking support, right? And throughout that class, I finally, it was something that it was a change of heart, right? I think it was for me where it's like, at first I was law enforcement, criminal justice, and I was like, you know what? Let me see what other career I can look at where I can actually help, people within my community and actually empower these folks. And, it ended up having that course through consultation with the professors. You were one of them yourself. And I came to decide, you know what, it's social work it is. And did my part of, doing all the application process, got into USC, and that's where I ended up completing my master's of social work.
Wow. And so you started off as a community college student and then transferred for university and then continued to your grad studies. What was it that you said to yourself, you know what, I can get through this? You grew up in East LA, right?
Correct. Yep. A little bit has to do with culture. I think as the eldest of three, right? I, for myself, grew up in a single parent household with my mom. I didn't have my dad for quite some time. And I think for me, it was just setting the bar, setting the standard. I think for me, I grew up with this chip on my shoulder where it was like, I got to make sure I perfect my classes. I got to make sure that Sergio can do it all, regardless of how hard it was. I was that trailblazer where I was like, I can't let my family down and I can't let myself down. I think I've always stood with this phrase that I use till this day. And even I used it today before I prepped for this podcast. And it's, I can, I will, I must. And it's something that I remind myself all the time when I have things coming up. And it's something that's very important to me or something that's true to heart. But for myself, it was that I grew up as a father figure for my siblings. And I just wanted to make sure that the struggle that I was embarking in as a first gen student, I didn't want them to go through that. And if it was something that they were going to go through it, at least they had that support, or I knew, you know what, we're going to take it through this path, or we're going to go this way, or let's do it from this sort. And, as I mentioned, right, yourself and Professor Jose Juarez were a big pivotal part of my educational journey. But, throughout that time, I also had another mentor for our EOP&S program at ELAC. And his name is Dr. Joseph Sandoval. And he was also very instrumental in, guiding me through this process. Again, it was just more stepping out of my comfort zone. I think for me, I had to really challenge myself and grow through it. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have the questions. I wasn't as social as I was now. But it was something where, like, if I can do it, anyone can do it, and I think that can be cliche at times, but I really feel like that's the only way we're going to be able to make change, right? Or cultivate change in this endeavor that I'm in.
Right. And it sounds like if you had it within you to find that path, to not give up, believe in yourself. As being one of the mentors for your siblings now, any challenges that you have mentoring them?
Yes, my little brother, my goodness, save me with all the patience that I've had. You know what? Me and my sister, to be quite honest, we grew up around the same. We're like 2 years apart. So we kind of grew up with the same experiences. My brother, as I tell him, like, he's very blessed. And at times I use this word, which I shouldn't, but I tend to use the word privilege, right? Because my brother didn't have to go through what we went through. My brother We had him in private schools. I was doing everything I can to have him there. So he kind of had it easy, but for me, it was something that I was honored to give my brother. And when it came down to mentoring, right, or like take this course or do this, for him it was like, oh, I'm okay, I don't need that, or I'm gonna do it my way. And it just became something where it was just we're always clashing, right? Because I already knew what I didn't want him to go through, right? But for him, it was like, well, I haven't gone through it, I can do it myself. With my sister, it was more along the lines of like, don't tell me what to do, I know what I'm doing, right? Especially because we were obviously doing different professions. She's doing nursing, I'm doing social work or criminal justice at that time. And then she's at PCC, I'm at ELAC. So for her, she had this mindset of like, I don't like ELAC, like I'm gonna stay where I'm at. And I have people to guide me at that moment. And for me, I took it very like very prideful in helping people. So for me, it was a point of like, listen to your brother, like I'm here to help you out, But that was just it was a little tough, but we got through it.
Yeah, you sure did. You bring up a very important point about community college. There's this perspective I think that society has in community college where it's like, don't go waste your time. It's only 2 years, but yet not many people finish in 2 years. To me, I think I also went to ELAC, and ELAC was the foundation for me that have pretty much helped me understand who I was, what I wanted to do with my life. Granted that I didn't have that resource or even pathway into that are the many students have now, but it was it is the most important degree that I have. What's your take on your experience with community college and to connect with our audience? Obviously, our audience being Rio Hondo students, what's your message to them about Rio Hondo?
Rio Hondo or any specific community college that we talk about, I think is the foundation for many students to empower themselves. I think when I started at community college, I thought the same thing too, right? I was blessed to go to a private school during my middle school, but for high school, I went public. But at first, when I started that, I was like, oh my God, this is where I landed. This is where I'm at. As I grew up, or as I started getting those classes, started meeting people, right? Those connections that you make, those mentors that you have, it built a sense of community for me there. I think I was able to find my identity. I was able to say, this is who I am, and this is where I'm at, and this is okay. Going to community college doesn't necessarily mean that you're not smart, that you're not going to get through. Yes, I went in with that intention, right? I got to get out of here 2 years, right? But these are just goals that you put in place for yourself. But schools like Rio Hondo are great schools. I think with I, I would say the support system, right, or this mentoring program that we have here, I think it's a pathway to lead to where you want to go at. And there shouldn't be no shame into being part of these schools. I think it's the best way to navigate, your educational journey, to be quite honest with you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. In our previous episode, we brought in Dr. Dennis from Cal State LA, Department Chair at Child and Family Studies Department, and she shared with us just the obscene amount of options that we have at Cal State LA for those of us that want to go into child development, not just teaching, but different options. She talked about social work. She talked about other majors that you can steer your way into for a profession. And one of the biggest advantage now being in current society is as a community college student, you get 2 years paid. Something that I know I didn't have when I was going to ELAC. And granted that, yes, financial aid was there, but just to have that stress off your shoulders for tuition or even saving some money if you're working to pay for your undergrad or even grad studies, it's a great opportunity. I think that students should really take advantage of that. So let's get into Cal State LA. So then you transfer into Cal State LA. Was it difficult for you transitioning from a community college to a four-year university?
It was just because I always grew up as a very anxious kid, I guess, at that time, or very young. So it's that uncertainty, right? Not knowing what you're getting into, as I mentioned, right? As a first generation student, you don't know what to expect. You don't know how people are going to treat you. And again, right, it's about building that community, right? I was at ELAC. I had found community. I felt a sense of belonging. Now, coming into Cal State LA in the beginning was like, okay, here I go again, a new journey, a new path. But I already came with these, we're going to call them tools, right? I already came with these tools, this tool set that I knew if I say this, if I come here, if I try to build community, I'm going to be able to navigate it. The beginning it was, but again, like I mentioned to you, right? I think it was me stepping out of my comfort zone. So what did I do? I decided to get a job. I worked as a server at I believe it's called the Club University Club at Cal State LA. Met folks there. A couple of them had the same interest that I did. And then through that, right, I think it was also me going to office hours with professors. I was very adamant about
Mhm.
making sure I was on top of my things and just finding that sense of belonging. And for
Mhm.
me, right, yourself, Jose, it was like these are people that look like me, probably have the same experiences, or at least can understand me to some capacity. And having that was really a foundation of me being who I truly was and embracing this journey, right? At first, I was like, I'm 28, 27 at that time, and I'm barely gonna get my bachelor's. I think that's what I would think, right? Or I'm this old, I should be in my career, I should have a master's. But all that went away, building that community and being part of Cal State LA.
Yeah. So now you finished Cal State LA, you graduated, you got your undergrad. Did you know that you wanted to go to USC, or was it, let me just give it a shot? What was your mindset upon finishing your undergrad?
Yeah, so when I was finishing my undergrad, truthfully, I think like many students, I think encounter this. As I was going through that process, I really didn't have at that moment, right? As I was graduating, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. My mind was, I'm gonna work for LA County probation, and that's just I just stood with it, right? But I didn't think about how long the process is, if I'm really gonna like it or not, or for example, if that's something that's really for me, right? Or truly that I want. So throughout that last semester, I was like, okay, what schools am I gonna apply to social work, right? So at first I was like, I'm gonna apply to Cal State LA, all the Cal States, right? Long Beach, Dominguez Hills. But I've always wanted to be part of the UC system. I was like, you know what? At this point, I had an identity in myself. I had the confidence. I knew what I came with. Yes, I didn't have the best experience, the best childhood, but I knew that what I had was enough to get into these schools. And right, I decided to apply to USC. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the first in my family to get into a UC, and it's going to be USC. And, again, right, I went in with that, again, first generation, embarking that uncertainty. But again, I had that tool set, I had those skills with me, I had the people with me already that were going to support me. And I was like, no, you know what? USC it is, and I'm going to make sure I get into this school. And I started doing what I was doing initially at ELAC, or what I learned at ELAC, what I learned at Cal State LA. Start reaching out, looking for scholarships, start calling financial aid, start looking into the professors that I want to possibly build community with, start looking into places like the USC Latino Alumni Association. So I was part of that. I looked into the Norman Topping Fellowship. I was part of that. And these are again organizations, scholarship funds that not only they're here to provide you that financial support that you need, right, for grad school, but it's about building that community that you need, cultivating these relationships. And everyone, right? We were all across different careers, majors, but we all came with similar backgrounds. We all came from the same community. And it was like that's what really was for me like, no, this is where I want to be at. And thankfully that's where I ended up going.
So it sounds like, regardless of where you were at in school, you wanted to be successful, and you were going to go to all ends to make sure that you accomplish your goals. Like you said, believing in yourself, um, feeling that sense of empowerment to make sure that you get to your goal. And I'm very happy for you in your accomplishments that you've done. Let's go back about and talk about your childhood. Growing up, did you see yourself being academically successful?
To some certain capacity, to be quite honest with you. And I think what really I say that, but I don't say it like with a grain of salt, but I do say it in a sense of like I knew that education was gonna make me, or was the pathway for me to take to not be or not have these same cycles that we have in my family or in the community that we live in, right? So like I mentioned, right, I was fortunate enough to go to little private school here in East LA. I only went there till middle school, but the way things were brought up at that school, or the people that I met throughout that time, I think that's what really told me, like, the importance of going into school, whatever your major may be, right? I don't think that even matters. It's just about making sure that, you come with some knowledge and you use that knowledge, right, to your advantage or to what your passion is.
Mhm.
But I did, in my mind, I knew like education is the only way I'm going to get out of where I was from, right? I mentioned, right, the housing projects, and it was just very difficult. That actually, to some capacity, was some form of therapy for me, was some form of distractions from, the things that were going on in my household, or, having to deal with my mental health at that time, or even just the influence of, gang activity, right? Or even, consuming things that I wasn't even supposed to consume, that I never did, right? But it was just the more of that mentorship, right? Education brought me these mentors that I needed to get me away from that, to steer me away from what I didn't want to be part of.
And you're talking about environments that we grew up in. Sometimes, actually, all the time, we're that's not within our control. You know, we're children, we're growing up, we're pretty much put in those environments, whether they're a necessity or that's just all the parents can provide. But there's a lot of challenges that, excuse me, that come that way. One of the commonalities that you and I have is growing up in East LA, growing up around gangs, drugs, prostitution, violence, you name it. You know, we pretty much grew up in that, and I resonate with what you're saying because I remember just how difficult it was for us to stay focused, to stay on task, to be able to say, you know what, yeah, I'm going to make it one day when I have friends that were being killed. Literally, I was with one of my friends. We were playing video games, and he went his way, I went my way. It was in East LA. If you know where El Pino is, he went up towards El Pino, and I went home. He got killed. Never saw him again. Last time I saw him, the memory that I have of him is we were playing video games at the donut shop. And that was just pretty much the environment that we were in East LA. I don't think I ever saw myself being successful, whatever success was for me at that time. But now, as I continue with my journey, I see myself and I see a lot of students, and it's like, man, you got all this potential, you know, something that I wish like my professors or not now I have mentors, but at that time I didn't have any mentors. And I think it would have made things a whole lot easier. What's your take on mentorship? How important is someone to have a mentor to help them along their journey?
I think it's very pivotal, to be quite honest, right? I think, like you mentioned, you say, or like myself, I honestly did not believe in myself. I didn't think, I knew that education was the pathway, right? But I didn't, internally, I was like, Sergio, you don't have what it takes. You're not
Mhm.
smart. You have to pay all these bills, and then you're going to try to go to school. Do you have time for that? All these problems coming up. And I didn't believe, right? I didn't have that thought process. I didn't think I have it in me.
Mhm.
Mentorship is the key for me. I think that's the key for me to empower other folks. If you don't have that, then how can you even, there's no guidance, I think, right? I think
Mhm.
with mentorship you have guidance. With mentorship, you're able to believe in yourself. You have that reassurance that you're able to do this without any problem that's coming your way, right? Yes, it's going to be hard, definitely, but you're able to navigate it a little differently. I feel like with mentorship, you're able to not only have that guidance, but you're also able to, I would use the word, like, it's a concrete support. It's a concrete support because
Yeah.
at home, my mom can tell me échale ganas, right? She can be like, tú puedes, you got this. And in my mind, I was like, Mom, but you don't know how hard it is. You don't know my exam. You got this, tú puedes, and it's like, no, through the other people, you're able to see their story, you're able to see what they
Mhm.
went through. And a lot of them share, right? Like you and I would share, our stories. And it was something where we were able to be like, okay, if Jorge was able to do this or Jorge does this, like I can see myself doing that, or you would give me that extra push. And I think that's what it is for me.
I think back to I have this fond memory of you. We were up in the library. We were having conversation. You were talking about grad school, and I remember asking you, "Have you considered USC?" And the face that you gave me was like, and I remember going on with that conversation with you, and to telling you, just like I tell my students at the end of every semester, I tell them, if you need someone to believe in you, if you need a cheerleader, hey, I'm there. I'm there to cheer you on. I want you to be successful. I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be better than me. Um, I I take a lot of pride in that. I'm very blessed to be able to work with future leaders like yourselves and other people that I've crossed paths with. Um, do you see yourself as a mentor now for others?
I'm honored now that a lot of people see me like that. A lot of people now, thanks to you, thanks to my mentors that helped me throughout this way, for any little thing, right? Financial aid, application process, personal
Mhm.
statements. I think that's one thing I took from all of you, to be quite honest with you, all these mentorships, all these mentors and mentorship programs that I was in. I saw the value in it, and I saw how much that helped me. And again, I think it's that word, right? Empowering myself, believing in myself, because I didn't,
Mhm.
right? And now people reach out to me and I'm just like, oh yeah. And it just makes me feel so good. Like I'm able to do this for them. And this is going to get them to this next place.
Yeah, it's please correct me if I'm wrong, but when we tell you we believe in you, we mean that, right? And I'm glad that you were able to believe that and to have accomplished what you've accomplished. So now that you're a social worker, what does your job look like? What do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I work for the Department of Children and Family Services, and our focus is on permanency, well-being, and safety. I'm what we call an emergency response social worker, and what that job entails is I investigate child abuse and neglect investigations. Throughout this process, we're looking into ensuring that the child is safe and not at risk. And throughout that process, I think one of the things for myself is, and I'll say this because I think I try to be very transparent and vulnerable, right? I think with our agency, they have a lot of backlash for how practice was back then. But I think the work that is being now is completely different. And I think we try to focus more on prevention rather than bringing that intervention or being involved. So I investigate any form of allegation that comes in, and then I have to decide whether we decide to intervene, link families to services, or actually provide that maintenance for them and walk through them throughout that duration of promoting a case and making sure that they follow through with what I would call we would formulate goals or plans for them and see
Mhm.
if we're able to navigate and help them out with that.
Right. One of the biggest scrutiny that was DCFS took was the death of Gabriel Fernandez years ago, and there's a Netflix series out on it. It's really hard to watch. I saw it in my child abuse and family violence class. We talk about it. Students that have watched it, we have conversation into what happened, who dropped the ball, and it's always easier just to blame the system. But the argument for any system, I think, is that on paper everything looks wow. It's just a matter of having people to implement that responsibility and to make sure that we're following through with it. Um, is do you think DCFS is a good pathway for anyone that might be interested in that?
I believe it is. I feel, and I will be quite honest with you, when I first started at DCFS, I also thought the same thing too, right? What
Mhm.
agency am I getting myself into, or how did I even get myself into this agency myself, right? And I'm gonna just step back a little bit on how this process worked, right, or my path to becoming social work with DCFS. Throughout my time at USC, I was actually looking into ways into funding my tuition, right? How am I going to be able to navigate this expensive tuition, right, at USC? And DCFS actually has a workforce development program, and it's run through Cal State systems and also the UC systems. And I decided to apply for it, right? I think for myself, like I mentioned, I grew up in the housing projects. I seen DCFS. My family was involved in DCFS, and right, we talk about that scrutiny, and it was more like, what can I do, or what experience can I learn from this experience, right? I decided to apply. I got accepted into the workforce development program, and then that's where I ended up doing my internship my last year,
Mhm.
and that's how I was able to get this employment, right? And I think we're on the right track. I don't see where things are getting worse. I do know, right, like you mentioned, right? I think we're very quick to blame the system or see it from that capacity. But I do see where we're trying to reduce disproportionality and disparity. I do see more where we're trying to be culturally humble, right? I think it's more where now we're coming in as a learner rather than the expert, right? I think back then it was more we're
Yeah.
like, no, this is wrong, do this. Now it's like, let me understand you, right? Now it's a family voice. Now it's let me hear your story for us to empower you.
Yeah. Tell us more about the workforce. What are some good things that they have for you to help you pay for your tuition?
So throughout the workforce development program that I was in, yeah.
Yes.
So what ends up happening is basically, like I mentioned, right? We end up applying, and then they end up providing us with assistance for our tuition. As part of that assistance that we receive, they have payback programs,
Mhm.
and basically you end up telling them like I'm going to take this much amount of money and I'll pay back by working for DCFS, right? So throughout the programs, back in the day, it used to be 2 years. Now they have it for 1 year. And I think throughout that program, or I don't think it's what it is, right? Throughout this workforce development program, we focus back on mentorship, right? I
Mhm.
think My field instructor, I think, was one of the best that I've ever had as with when it comes down to internships. And right, we talk about mentoring, right, or talk about building community and finding those networks that can help you navigate the system. You're able to find a career at DCFS. I will say that. I think there's a lot of avenues to it. We don't
Mhm.
just investigate allegations. We don't just do the case management component. I think we also focus on, prevention and aftercare services. We also have, other agencies or other components, right? Such as adoptions. We have other different units, specialized units that some collaborate with law enforcement, other focus on working with commercially sexualized exploited children. And I think you're able to, I would say, build up your skills. I mean, if I really wanted to be quite honest with myself, spend my whole life at DCFS, I can possibly do that from starting where I'm at now to possibly an administrative level.
There's more pathways now that you're working there. You finish your school, they help you with tuition. You start the workforce, and in that workforce, there's more pathways for you. That's what you're saying, right?
Correct.
That's awesome. And it gives you that sense of security of, hey, you know what? There's something waiting for me there after graduation, which I think it's one of the biggest fears that students tell me is, should I go back for a grad degree or should I start working because I need that financial stability? And a lot of the times, it it's a no-brainer, especially if you're coming from a background like what we connect with, being impoverished, not having many resources. It's very enticing to go after that money, but when you look at the big picture, it makes much more sense to continue to invest in yourself, to prepare yourself, to make you that better candidate. And like I mentioned, Dr. Dennis we talked about graduate degree, we talked about doctorate degree, and she said the degree is not going to get you anything. You're not entitled to anything. It prepares you better to be that better candidate, and it's just a matter of what you're going to do with that degree. And it sounds like if you're doing a lot with not just DCFS but also giving back. If you can provide some form of advice for someone that's stuck from saying, you know what, I know I'm going to transfer to a four-year university, but I don't know if I want to continue for a master's. What would your takeaway or what would your advice be to them?
I would start off with validating how they feel. I think that that's very important. I think at first we're very like, oh my God, like, just do it, like, you're gonna be okay. Like, don't worry about it, right? But I think I would first validate how they feel. But my advice would be, just like I tell a lot of people myself, like one of the things is like uncertainty or even just any form of difficulty leads to opportunities, right? And I think this uncertainty for myself or even that what I went through or what students are going to go to, I think it's an opportunity for change and growth, right? If we don't step out of our comfort zone, are we really growing? I think, right, change is hard, but yet change is good. So we have to make sure that we step into this, right, with that right mentorship, with the right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I know that no matter what's going on, externally, you're going to be able to navigate the system. You're going to be able to navigate your educational journey into making sure that you get to where you want to get.
Mm-hmm. That I really love that you said about that validating. I think validation is one of the things that we don't do enough of. We don't validate our own feelings. We talked about that in last season with Glenn, our therapist. We also talked about how it's important for us to understand that, hey, you know what, we're important. We're an important part of society. We're an important part of whatever network we're in. Um, Being part of that higher ed, in my field, you being part of social services, we're pretty much here to empower society for change. What do you want society to change most? There was a podcast I was listening to, Dr. Gabor Mate, and I reference him a lot, doing a lot of reading a lot of his work, listening to a lot of his research that he's done, and he talked about we're living in a time where hate crime is crazy. It's all over the place, and he talked about where is this hate crime coming from? Where is it manifesting? Why is it continue being cultivated? And he has great points. But I'm curious to know what your point is. What is the one thing that you feel that society should change?
I would say acceptance of oneself, right? And what I mean by that is, I think when we're talking about hate crimes here, right? It's just the different hate crimes that are involved with this society, right? I think if we were able to accept how one is and not definitely focus on like the social norms of what is supposed to be right and what is supposed to be wrong, I think that's where we are able to embrace change, right? And embrace our uniqueness. If we're not able to do that, then are we really here to support each other? Are we really here trying
Mhm.
to make a change? If we stick to what we have, we're clearly going to stay stagnant and not make any form of change. So for myself, I think it's acceptance of who one is. If we're really able to look at that and dig deep into that, then we're able to be who we are and not have to like necessarily go through what we go through at this point.
And culture, I think culture plays the biggest influence in that, into these cultural norms that then bleeds into societal norms. What has been the biggest change that you've seen yourself since starting your higher ed up until now, being in the workforce, being a leader? Is there something that really stands out to you that you say, you know what, I'm glad I changed this about me?
Yes, I'm glad you bring up that question. I think for myself, it all started, and again, right? We talk about our childhood trauma, we talk about our experiences. To be quite honest with you, and I don't think I've ever shared this with you, and I'm glad I have this space now. For myself, after my higher ed and going through all these mentorship programs and really telling you like where I was finding myself, one of the things that I ended up doing was I ended up, sharing with my family that I'm actually part of the LGBTQ community. And that was something that was very hard within myself growing up as a kid. That was
Mm.
like the hardest thing I can do. We talk about culture, we talk about machismo. I'm the eldest of three. And I mean, here I am perspiring, right? Oh my God. But I mean, it's
You're
just
in a
it's
safe space, Sergio.
just an honor to be able to have that space and to be able to say that, that was something that I just could not do, right? And again, right as I mentioned, having that space with certain people and then just being my true self, right? I think when we're talking about earlier when you mentioned right about cultural norms and societal norms, like I really had to challenge that. I really had to tell myself, like, you know what, I need to be that change again, right? To empower, to make sure that others have that safe space. And through this work that I have now, I'm able to just give back to my community and being who I am and embracing that.
And then thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your vulnerability. I think it's important for our audience to know that when when you meet genuine people, you feel like if you can trust them and you're able to say things like you're saying now. It's important for us to go out there and empower society, leaders of society, to be themselves. I think one of the biggest clash that I have in society is, and I don't understand. And the more that I try to understand, the more frustrated I feel. Is to fit in into certain things. It's like we were born to stand out. We were born to shine. We were born to be individuals. Working in the preschool classroom, I tell my students, I tell the parents that I work with, it's about your child being an individual, building their own identity. I want them to be their full potential to themselves. Like, how can I help Jorgito be the best Jorgito that he can possibly be? And with society, as much as I hear it, sometimes it's really frustrating where if we're not fitting in, then there's this backlash to it, right? Growing up in East Los, and I know this is petty, but I'm gonna throw it out there. Being a Giants fan, San Francisco Giants fan, I get a lot of heat for that, and it's like, look, I'm still Jorge. I still have the values. I just don't like the Dodgers, and it's okay. With society, especially with LGBTQ plus, Black Lives Matter, and all the movements that we have. I love how people are getting together and fighting for a cause. And it's not about saying, "Hey, you have to agree with me." It's about saying you have to respect me. And I think that that's where we as a society we're losing the battle. They're not asking us to be them. They're not asking us to think like them. They're asking us to accept them. And I think that as leaders, that's where we need to take that huge step into saying, you know what, we're going to stand by you because we support you. We accept you. Yes, we have difference in opinion. We have different in how we see the world, but that doesn't change who we are. That doesn't make me a better person. That doesn't make you a better person. And what we're fighting for is to be, to have that equitable space in society. Again, thank you for sharing that, Secretary. It really, I'm hearing you speak, and I'm like, man, this is powerful stuff. Um, has there been any challenges for you since you came out into the LGBTQ plus community? Any backlash in the workforce, at school, family?
I would start off with family. I think that was definitely the hardest part.
Mhm.
Coming out to my mom, especially I think I don't want to say especially at this age, but given how much little Sergio had to hide it, right? I think it was something that was one of the hardest things for me. But at the same time, I mean, now I embrace it to the highest capacity. I didn't start telling a lot of my family. It all started with close friends, right? Like you mentioned, right? That trusted space. Um, Within the workforce, I wouldn't say there's any backlash at the moment or there isn't any challenges. I think with the agency that I'm in, they're very big on acceptance of who you are and
Mhm.
inclusivity. You as we know, right? We have our Pride Month and we have certain days. There hasn't been anything out in society can get a little different, you know. I think given my appearance and how I look, and if I say something or if I go something, maybe someone may look at me some way. But I tend to remind myself, right? I think that we all have a different journey when we decide to, say who we are and how we feel and what we like. But I also tell myself, like, their story, their perspective is not necessarily who I am, right? As we talked about, right? Respect and acceptance. At least if I'm respected to some capacity, if there's any backlash, I just remind myself that again, they're also learning, and maybe this is something that they don't know about, or it's culture, or it's societal, it's a social norm that they possibly abide to.
Yeah, and it's very interesting in how we in the class that we were together in child abuse and family violence. We talked a lot about um, social constructs, into how we as a society build up these constructs based on our cultural myths. And like, for example, my mom swears that vapor rub cures everything. Hey mom, I have a headache. Oh, if you rub some on your temples, you'll be fine. Hey mom, I think I got a bruise on my elbow. Oh, rub some vapor rub. She's very adamant about it, and I'm not discrediting her. I'm just. I remember one time I did ask her. I said, "Where did you get this from?" And she said, "Oh, because my grandma, she would put vapor rub on us growing up." And it's like, okay, there really is no scientific evidence behind that. But again, it's like we talked about. It's that respect and cultural. I think culturally speaking, um, especially if you come from a Latino, Mexican, very traditional machismo culture, there's these ideologies and there's these norms and these roles that we have to abide by, and they're non-debatable, right? And the moment that you deviate from those roles, then there's this huge backlash. I remember growing up talking to my dad, again, going back to sports, and saying, I'm gonna be a Giants fan. Pero por qué, mijo? ¿Por qué? Todos somos Dodgers, ¿tú por qué? And then eventually he did say, si eso es lo que te gusta, pues yo te voy a apoyar. And it was like, that to me was like, man, okay, I get it. And it's not a fair comparison, but for my dad to acknowledge that, hey, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit different, it wasn't even a big deal to him. Um, as a leader now, Sergio, for our students out there that maybe want to have that space to say, hey, you know what, I do see things different. I do feel different about myself. Where can you direct them? What advice would you give them to go? Would it be a counselor? Would it be what would you call those enrollment advisors? A mentor? What? How did you find these mentorships when you were going to school, so our audience can have more faith in the mentorship programs that are available to them?
Well, yes, I think for me, it started off honestly, like we say, right? I think it's more about reaching out, right? If they can't hear you, do they know what's going on, right? Or like they say, right? If you don't speak, or you can we hear what you're saying, right? For myself, I think I started off with professors. I think I started off with doing office hours or sending an email, like whether it's about an assignment or just getting to know the professor. I think is one of my things, right? Looking into their bio, seeing where they're at. If it wasn't that, I think it's through mentorship programs like what we have here, what you have, or like for me, it was with the EOPNS. And it was just through inquiry. I think for myself, it was stepping into the space and, hey, this is, I'll be quite honest to you. The way I did it was, hey, I'm new to this. I don't know exactly what this program has, but I'm interested. I see that you have this, you have this. And, or I would even say, like, I don't even know what I have to fill out. Like, I really didn't know a lot of things. I was pretty naive when I started my community college, but it was just stepping out of that comfort zone and really reaching out and just challenging
Mm.
myself to meeting with counselors, even if it was just like an advisor, right? Like you mentioned, sometimes I would have certain counselors, but I would just meet like 10 minutes, but I would just grasp that little question that I had just to give me that reassurance that I was on the
Mm.
right track, right? And then with EOPNS, it was like we would meet monthly. So I had another reassurance, or with professors like yourself, right? Where I would just go and meet and ask for some form of advice. And then that actually made me believe more in myself.
And our first episode for this season, season four, we had OC Motivator. He's social media influencer, and he said that his advice would be to ask questions. Always ask questions. And I love how you're saying, just go in there and ask, hey, I don't know, is there something that I got to fill out? Is there anything that I got to do? I think that that puts us, many of us, in a very vulnerable position that we don't want to be in because we have this fear of asking questions. I was having a conversation with my older daughter, and I said to her, I said, don't be afraid to ask questions, but you also have to be respectful in how you're asking those questions. And she said, well, what if they tell me the answer and I don't understand? I said, well, respectfully ask again, or maybe ask it in a different way. It's about the people that are teaching you. And we're having a conversation because she's going into middle school. And it's probably more nerve-wracking for the parents than it is for children going into middle school. But I said to her, I said, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask the same question in a different way until it finally makes sense to you. And I think that a lot of people are afraid to ask questions because we think that if we ask a question, we're going to feel dumb if we don't understand the answer, or we're going to feel like, oh, they're just going to shut me up, or, oh, I should know this answer. Asking questions is very important because it helps us understand. I tell my students all the time, if you don't ask me, then I don't know that you need help. I can't read your mind, right? And um, that usually breaks the wall for a lot of students. I love when students like yourself, we would have office hours. I remember for that semester, we had reflective journals, and you would stop by every week and we would talk about them and we would read them together. And you ended up getting a perfect score. And I told the class, I was there for all of you guys. It's just a matter of whether you were willing to do it. Um, I want to know if you had one advice to give to our audience, the best advice that you would give to them that you've learned throughout your journey. What would that advice be?
Trust the process and believe in yourself. And it may not sound like it's a lot, but I think when I'm using the word trust the process, or when I'm using that phrase, I just want to, for me, it's just more of accepting that things may not be easy, right? I think as first generation students, as just students who are trying to get some form of mentorship, it's not going to come easy for anyone, right? And I think, like you mentioned, right, asking questions, right? So I would definitely trust the process and making sure that throughout that process of guiding yourself, you have these people that are put in place, right? That you've stepped out of your comfort zone, that you've made sure that you find that community, build that community, find that space. And just remind yourself that you're in this journey. Everyone's journey is definitely different and unique. Not everyone's is easy. And at the end of the day, if you have the right support system and if you really believe in yourself, you're gonna get some rounds. Because I'll tell you this much, little Sergio, and not think he would be here at this moment. And I'm definitely still, I still think about it to this day of where I started. And then when you reached out to me and we had a conversation, like it just solidified a lot of things for me, to be quite honest.
That's awesome. Great advice. Sergio, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for empowering our audience. And I hope that it resonates with a lot of us. To the next one, everyone, stay safe. See you in the next one.
Capture the passion.